Welcome back to Army of Roussillon, the Lace Wars, War of the Grand Alliance, Spanish theater. This is going to be, I guess, part 3, technically, part 2 of gameplay. If you've been following the series this far, you know kind of what's happened here. We've had the French conducting an invasion of Spanish Catalonia. We've had the French capture the fort of Camprodon, which is up here. And then in the last video, we reached the end of the spring turn. We played a full quarter of the game, and the prestige effects were the French were up by 1 prestige in the game. Since then, I've played a bunch off camera. We are now currently in the July-August summer turn. We've had dry weather for the past couple of months. We also had a French naval raid on Barcelona, and that had pretty wide-reaching effects for the Spanish player. So if you remember, we had the Spanish Viceroy Villahermosa up here kind of looking to potentially challenge the French armies that have been coming down this valley. And with the French winning naval superiority and conducting a naval raid, that forced the Spanish, at the cost of a prestige if they did not do it, to relocate the Viceroy to Barcelona, and additionally to deploy at least 1 unit in each of Spain's fortified port locations. So that included Barcelona. You can see now we have a unit up here in Palamos. We've got a unit up here in... Oh, why can't I read that? Cadaqués. And I believe we have one here in this garrison in Rosas. So the Spanish forced to shuttle some troops around. Those 3 units that went up the coast to prevent against future French naval raids came from Barcelona, and then the army had to relocate and move down. So the Spanish are not going to lose prestige for the naval raid because they were able to get back and garrison their fortified ports in time. However, it is going to force them to stay in these positions for at least 1 full turn. And so the French are going to have, and the French win the initiative automatically as well. So the French are going to have kind of free run of the center of the map for this month, this 3-week turn. So that is where we are. However, we are also going to have our first battle. The Spanish, given what happened, the Spanish were tired of the French moving around through here, threatening the Barretines markers. The French did capture another Barretines rebel marker. And so the Spanish had decided they'd had enough. They're going to try their cavalry here under column A against the French column that's been coursing for the beginning of this quarter. And they want to try and drive them to be ineffective. They want to try and drive them out of the theater and give themselves some breathing room so they can consolidate and refocus on suppressing the Catalonian rebellion. So we are going to have our first combat. The combat in this game is multi-stage. It is based around wings. So we're at an operational level here. Based on the outlay of forces on the displays, you're going to have some number of SPs in the combat, and you're also going to have to deploy those SPs into various wings. The object of combat, if you fight, is to make a certain number of wings of the opponent become combat ineffective. And there's a process for doing that. However, before we get there, this is going to be a very small battle if we get to a battle. And it does look like the Spanish have the unit quality advantage over the French here. So that's the reason why I think I wanted to take this chance. Now, obviously, if we were playing opposed, the Spanish player would not know that unless they had done some reconnaissance. But we're going to try it nonetheless. But the first thing that you do when you're doing combat, before anything else happens, is you have to roll on this surprise table. So just like in OCS, there is a chance that the attacker or the defender gets surprised. Now, there's a default 10% chance that one of those things is true. However, you only make 1 roll. So the 1 roll applies to both sides, then you apply die roll modifiers per side for the 1 roll. So let's go ahead and make that roll now, and I will show you what we get. We want kind of, if we're the French, we don't want to be surprised. So let's make the roll. Sorry about the blur. Oh boy. We rolled a 0. So let's go and consult the table and see what happens. All right, well, the result of that roll compared to the chart is that the Spanish, the attackers who moved into these woods, this town here where the French cavalry was posted, are surprised. This is helped in no small part to the Spanish leader's blundering incompetence. He's a rash leader that's not good, and he just went full beans into the woods here and ended up being surprised by the French, who apparently discovered that he was coming. So that has a whole host of negatives to the Spanish attacker. Namely, they have to choose their lead combat unit effectiveness at the start of the battle before the French do. Now, I don't think it's particularly going to matter because the Spanish have the best unit in the battle, which is this line horse unit, these Trozo de Cavalleria Ordenes. They are an A unit. They're going to be the best cavalry unit in the battle. So the Spanish will probably pick them. The other thing that is going to happen is that the Spanish could not build defensive works. So you have an opportunity right before battle to build some defensive works. And you also have the opportunity to try and retreat before battle. Now, if you're surprised, you can't do that. And so the Spanish cannot. The French could, if they wanted to, try and retreat before combat. And that's based on the quality of the leaders. If we go to the French leader here, he is the one in the center here, this 4 SG3 guy, Chazeron. He is a lot better than the Spanish's 1. So he would very likely be able to avoid battle. He would get a nice DRM to that. He'd have to do a leadership check against his 4, and he would be able to retreat. Now, I don't want to do that because A, I want to do a combat and show you how it works, and B, he has surprise. So retreating from combat here in sort of an even fight, he wants to leverage his surprise and hopefully go for the throat on the Spanish and cause them just a whole host of pain. So, like I said, combat is based around number of wings. We have a whole 2-page spread here for resolving the combat. We did the surprise. Now we have to look at the SP wing matrix. And this is going to tell you, based on how many SPs you have in the battle, how many wings your army can deploy in. In this case, both of our armies have 3 SPs because we have 3 line horse units. If we look there in the middle with the flipped over units, 3 line horse units per army. So that means we've got 3 units. However, line horse units are charge capable, meaning they count double. So we have 6 SPs per army. That means that each army is going to have a maximum of 1 wing plus 1. This is going to be a +1 row modifier on the combat results table. And so both sides will be looking here at the 1 wing column, and then we're going to make a bunch of shifts based on all of this stuff up and down. So +1 means that likely we're going to get no results more than we would necessarily results here. So that's how you determine how many wings. In bigger battles, you can see there's a lot of wings, and then the terrain of the battle, where the terrain is happening, like in these woods here, there's a maximum number of frontage that you can have for wings, and I believe it's 3. So if we had a big battle in woods, we can only actually get 3 wings into the combat, and any excess wings that you have in combat would be considered in the reserve. Those reserve wings could be posted to the front after a wing retreats in multiple rounds of combat. So again, you're trying to get an opponent's number of wings to retreat. So you can see here on the CRT, you can see the first number is how many wings of yours are sort of withdrawn from the battle, and the second number is how many wings of the opponents are withdrawn from the battle. So the more wings you have, the more you can continue fighting longer and longer, trying to sort of exhaust the enemy's wing capacity, essentially, is the way that this works. There is a worksheet for this, but I'm trying to do it without it because I'm holding a camera, and it's actually not too complicated. So the next thing we have to do, now that we've determined, and then retreat threshold. So how you win a battle is getting an enemy to reach their retreat threshold. So making a number of their wings retreat based on the quality of their units. So you cross-index your side's lead combat efficiency. So for the Spanish, that's an A. So if we look at the A row and the number of wings in this battle, we only have 1. So 1 wing. Once 1 wing, the sole wing in the battle retreats, the battle would be over. And the same is going to be true of the French, whose best unit is a B. They're probably going to select that. Although, you know, they may select their C units because it actually doesn't matter. And yeah, because the Spanish have to select first. The Spanish are going to select A. That's their best unit. They're going to hope they can get an advantage there. The reason that the French wouldn't want to select C is because there is a fairly significant modifier when you look at the quality difference. So here, if we have C versus A, there's 0. But if we have A versus C, it's -2, which is probably not good. Which is a row shift on the CRT for your die roll. So maybe the French will choose B. The reason that the lead combat unit is important is because you have to take your half of your losses in the battle to those units. So if you're using your best units up front, you are potentially risking them. So there's also cavalry superiority, and there's some other superiority as well with auxiliaries. I will show you that in a moment. Let me calculate the leader personality difference and the lead combat unit difference, and then we'll look at the CRT together. We are going to work through this together, but it is pretty self-explanatory once you start going. It's just a little bit of lookup. So here's the combat results table. I misspoke earlier. The left-hand column of a particular, the left-hand side of a particular column is, as it explains down here, is the number of SP losses inflicted to the enemy, and the right side is the number of wings that must retreat, essentially, from the combat. And then our shifts here are going to be up and down shifts on the die roll, basically. So here's what we rolled. So normally this is a simultaneous process, but because the French have surprise as the defenders, they get to roll first and apply the results first, which likely means that the Spanish are going to retreat, but we'll see what happens. So we roll the 5, perfectly even roll. So we look here at the 5, that is normally 1 SP loss, but no wing retreat in the first round of combat. However, we have to use our DRM. So the lead combat effectiveness matrix showed us that a B versus an A is actually no penalty. So we're close enough in skill with our lead units, which I'll show you here. The French, again, sorry about the light, have 3 line cavalry units that are actually, they're all Bs, not Cs. I have that misplaced, but we have 3 Bs, and the Spanish have an A and 2 Bs. So the French chose B, the Spanish chose A. There is no penalty on the lead combat effectiveness there, so there is no minus for the French. The personality matrix for the leaders is found on the next page, and that is here. And so the French have a cautious leader, that's C, and they are facing a rash enemy. So that is a -1, which is good. I think that is good. So we're at -1. No one has cavalry superiority because we are both have the same number of cavalry units. Musket bayonet superiority. All of these units are polearm-based cavalry units, so no muskets or bayonets. No one has artillery. No one had grenadier auxiliaries tasked to the combat. Screening superiority is good, but both sides committed in secret their auxiliaries to the combat, and they both chose screening auxiliaries, and they both had the same exact type. So they both had scouts, and they both had migueletes or migueletes if you're Spanish. Therefore, there is no screening advantage for either side. They both did the appropriate approach to battle reconnaissance. So there's no modifier there. There's no field works. And then if we remember in our wing matrix, we are on the 6 SP column. The number of wings is 1, but we do get a +1 on the die roll because it's a small battle. So all of that is to say we get -1 +1. -1 from the leader personality, +1 because it's a small battle. This hors de combat result DRM only applies to the right-hand row, okay? So we are facing off against better units here is the French. The enemy here is an A. So we rolled a 5. So from these modifiers, we rolled a 5, right? So we're here. We do 1 SP loss and 0 wing retreats, wings hors de combat, basically. Now, this particular result here, based on the quality of troops you're facing, makes it harder to retreat a wing if they have better quality soldiers. So it's taking into account the training and discipline of the soldier. So in this case, the French, they're facing off against A troops. That's +4. So even though they rolled a 5 with 1 SP loss and 0 wings, this wing column, this wing retreat column, actually is a 9, 0. So if we had, for example, rolled like a 2, we would have been 2 SP losses and a wing retreat. But because the Spanish cavalry is better, 1, 2, 3, 4, we actually would not have retreated them and gone to a second round of combat. So we take the result of this combat, which is a 5, which is 1 SP loss, and we have to do that to the Spanish surprise Spanish force, and it's got 50% of the losses, which is 50% of 1 rounded up, right, 0.5, is going to be to their line horse here, these Trozo de Cavalleria Ordenes, their lead unit. They are eliminated and destroyed. Now the Spanish only have 2 SPs left. And now we're going to repeat that process for the Spanish attack, because remember, in this first round, they were surprised. So let's see what the Spanish can do. Well, just a terrible result from the Spanish. They rolled a 9. There were no net shifts for them, so 0 and 0. And that concludes the first round of combat. Now, both sides have the option to try and withdraw from the combat, and there will be no more surprise. The French basically knocked out the lead best Spanish unit. This is going to be a fairly inconclusive battle, I think. I think until one side rolls pretty low, we're not going to have... we're essentially going to eliminate the wing before we force a wing to retreat, just given the quality of the troops involved here with the hors de combat table. So I'm going to look and see whether or not the Spanish want to try and withdraw. It's going to be very difficult for them because their leader is so crap. Again, it's Teniente General Miguel Ortazo. He's just very headstrong and brash. The one reason I might not want to try and avoid knowing that I'm going to fail is that if I fail, I have to make an attrition check, which could result in more SP losses. So I think maybe the Spanish are just going to try one more round and see if they can get lucky and cause some pain to the French. I should note here that, again, when you're playing opposed, both players make the decide about whether they're going to retreat or remain simultaneously and in secret. And if both sides agree to withdraw, then there is no roll. You just end the battle. But I'm playing solo, trying to understand the system. So the Spanish are going to stick out one more go, see if we can do a loss to the French, and we'll see where we are after that. So let's roll it up. Well, in round 2 of the battle, we get the French rolling a 6 and the Spanish rolling a 0, which is actually really good, and actually I think is going to win them the battle. So the French with a 6 do another SP loss, but they do not force the wing to retreat. The Spanish roll a 0, 2 SP losses, and 1 wing retreat. But let's keep in mind that the enemy lead combat unit is a +3. So if we go up 3, we still get 2 and 1. So the Spanish win somehow with a lucky roll, and that is why I wanted to keep them in here. So we need to do another SP loss to the Spanish. That is going to be here. We'll take the Asunya horse. So Spanish losing some units, and then we need to take losses to the French. Let's see. Let's take the Vendôme and La Reine. So those units are eliminated, and the French have lost a bunch of cavalry so far this year. And then the wing is retreated. So now there's a bunch of post-battle activities that happen, and I'll show you those. Okay, so what the 9 result means is, so once you determine the number of leader losses, in this case for the French 1, you roll to see if that 1 loss is to your overall commander of that force. If it was a 0, it would be. In this case, it is not. It is a 9. So I need to roll again on this table to select a random leader from the French officers' mess who is assumed to have been in that battle at a lower level command formation participating, and see what happens to him. All right, so I rolled a 5. That means the leader is wounded, and now I need to roll again to see how many turns he is going to be out of play for and wounded for, and then I'll randomly choose which leader that is. And the unlucky French general who was participating at the Battle of Santa Maria de Olo is Lieutenant General Monsieur de Saint-Sylvestre, and he's going to be wounded for 3 turns, so he's not going to be eligible to come back into the pool until the September-October turn, the first turn of fall. All right, the next thing that happens is our retreat, and we have to determine where we're going. So a retreat in this game is actually just like regular movement. You can retreat as many movement points as you're legally able to move, and that will trigger an attrition check if you go over, sort of trigger that. So I was looking at this, and I think where I want to go is I want to cut through these mountains, retreat over the hills, make it hard for the Spanish to follow. So we're going to go 4 to these hills, 2 to these wooded, I think wooded hills are 2. Let me just double check that. Wooded hills are actually 4. So maybe we don't want to go that direction. Maybe we want to go this way. I want to go basically 8 movement points. And you have to kind of retreat towards your friendly depots and forces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's go there. I don't have to roll an attrition check. My movement points are 20. I'm only spending 8 to go. Now we have to see if there's any pursuit on the Spanish side. So there's one more table we got to roll on. Yes, it's a lot of tables, but we're trying to simulate all aspects of this. So on a result of 0 or 1, pursuit occurs, and this we don't want this to happen as the French. We look at all the modifiers we have here. None of these are applicable, and then the number of wings that we had was equal, so this one doesn't count. The leadership matrix, there's a -1 for that because the French were cautious and the Spanish were rash. So that's one area where being a rash leader is actually good because you can get better pursuit. And then we look at the pursued, the quality of units being pursued, and that is going to be a B. So we're -1 for leadership, +1 for the pursued unit quality, and then we have to make a leadership check to see whether or not that is going to penalize us or not. So the leadership check here is based on a 4. That's the French leader. That is Mr. Chazeron. There, he's got the 4 leadership. So let's hope we get it. We got a 0, so we pass. So we get another +1 to the die roll. So if we roll a 0, we get pursued. Let's see. We rolled a 2. So +1 is 3. There is no pursuit, and we're allowed to retreat without any ill effects. And we've gotten away, and I believe that's the end of the battle. And just to show you here, the pursuit results table, if you do get pursued, it can be quite bad because you roll a die and cross-index with the remaining number of units, and you potentially take more SP losses for different types of units in your pursued column. The SPs are multiplied by basically who's doing the pursuing. So we can see here the pursuer, you can only pursue with line horse or Michele units. The pursued, if you are being pursued, your horses can provide sort of a defensive screen. They count for 2 times, right? So, dragoons are a little bit better at preventing pursuit and whatnot. And so, yeah, so then you'd roll on this table, and then depending on how big your army is and who's being pursued, the die roll will determine how many units will get picked off. So you can see in a small army of 4 SPs, infantry are the most likely to get pursued and run down. Cavalry, not at all. But as you get into bigger armies, you start to see the losses can be pretty heavy if you have a giant army here. So this makes battle very risky, right? It's an operational game. Battle is looked at the operational level and what can happen, what can slow it down and knock you out of a campaign season here. So it's pretty risky to have a big battle with a lot of troops, but I think we'll have one here in this game at some point. It's going to probably come down to it. All right, 2 more steps to resolve the battle here. One is prisoners of war. So if you win the battle, 10% of your losses become prisoners of war. Now, as far as I understand the rules, this is a round down situation, not a round to nearest situation like battle losses are. So in this case, we have 2. 10% of 2 is 0.2, so no prisoners of war. The French lost 2, this was a previous casualty, lost 2. They, because they're the loser, is 25%. So 2 divided by 4 is 0.5. I don't think that's enough for a prisoner of war. They would have to get to 1, I believe. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe POW calculation is rounding down. Only thing that's rounded to nearest is combat losses. So no prisoners of war for either side. And then the last thing we have to do is roll to see if either side loses operations points because of the battle. So this is the other risk to battles, is that you can lose your precious operations points simply by fighting. And that was a chart that you saw earlier. Let me find it. And yeah, so we roll a die for each side. Here's the table. There are DRMs. So if you had a pursuit happen or an overrun happen, overrun I think is a 5-to-1 odds difference when you enter a hex. And if you're victorious, it's a -1. So it's less likely as the attacker, but basically or less likely as the winner. So the attacker is going to lose one on a 6 or higher because it was the Spanish, it's going to be 7 or higher. So, and then for the French, it will be, they were the defender, they will only lose an op on 8 or higher. So let's roll that up. French 8, we're looking for French 8, Spanish 7. No, neither side loses an operation point. That is the conclusion of our combat. That is how a combat in Lace Wars works. And I will need to do that a few more times to get that under my belt. But there's a lot of dimensions to it, and I think it's probably pretty. You have to get really acquainted with the system to do the risk-reward calculations for whether or not a battle is worth it. As we saw, the Spanish, even though they were surprised on the attack, they got the better of the French here, and that was kind of unexpected. You know, had I tried to do the withdrawal, it probably would have gone a lot worse for the Spanish. But this is a good result. And now the Spanish in the next impulse, they probably want to try and pursue this fleeing French cavalry as far as they can and try and wipe them out. That would get rid of an operating force in Spanish territory. So I've been moving along the game here to try and get the entire year of 1689 into this one video, ideally, if I can. But a couple of dramatic turns that I wanted to cut in to show you as I'm playing through the turns. First of all, the Spanish guerrillas eliminated a French security HQ in this region here that is isolated the fort of Camprodon. So unless the French can get this security HQ trudging through the mountains, which they are trying to do, we are going to suffer some isolation there at that garrison, which is not going to be great for the accomplishments of the French army this year. After this, both sort of French forces moved down in this direction, and then I decided with my for the French, with my unassigned ops points, that I was going to go after a second target. I was going to be a little bit more ambitious than the French were historically this year, and I decided that I was going to try and take Castle Follet here, which is just a simple earthworks fortification. So it was very likely to succumb to a surrender once I got it invested. And in fact, I avoided taking any isolation because it's so close to the French border once I did that. We also have the Duc de Noailles forces here sort of covering that, but the Spanish had the initiative this turn, and so they were able to move up this. Cavalry column and move up Villahermosa's army, and so I could not cover both sides of the siege. And in this game, when you are attacked while you're besieging, you must lift the siege. And unfortunately, no matter what I do, that is going to happen here. So what I thought I could quickly sneak a quick surrender out of this fortress and get another prestige before the year was over, the Spanish managed to march all the way up from Barcelona along this road and around over here before I could stop them because of the initiative. Now, Villahermosa is not a great leader, and his force is not super large, but he's got to do something to stop that prestige gain. This could be a bad idea on the Spanish's part, and what it is going to result in is a giant battle. So we're going to have a much bigger combat. Additionally, on the French turn, I am allowed to try and move the Duc de Noailles into this hex to potentially join the battle. So what this system has is a rule called prevarication, where before the battle, you can kind of see if your leader is good enough to delay the proceedings long enough for relief forces to arrive and join. Kind of reminds me of War and Peace a little bit, how you can have like a swirling expansion of battles. In this case, I think I'm going to do it because there's no reason not to. I want to, if I can overwhelm and absolutely annihilate Villahermosa's army, it's going to make the 1690 campaign a lot easier. And even if I don't, I will at least have explored some of the system options for prevarication. So if I lose, unfortunately, then this army is probably going to have to retreat and maybe suffer pursuit, I believe. But I outnumber Villahermosa pretty significantly if I'm able to get them into the combat there. And so I think it's worth it to try, especially because he's a timid leader, which is probably not good. His leadership's only 2. Duc de Noailles is quite good. And the leader commanding the besieging force is also pretty darn good. So we're going to try it. It's going to be a giant clash. And I'm not going to go through the battle procedure again, but I will tell you what happens after I resolve it. We come to the end of the Battle of Castle Follet, the relief of the siege of Castle Follet, which was happening right here. And it turned into a Spanish victory, actually, against all odds. The battles in this system are very swingy. And so it's, you'd expect from this era, the combat here it's risky to engage in battle at any moment. And it was risky here for the Spanish with Villahermosa not being a great leader. But fortunately for the Spanish, they had just enough strength points, thanks to their cavalry advantage, that they were able to double up the number of wings that they had against the French. And then in 3 rounds of combat, despite taking some punishment right on the nose and the elimination of some of the best horse units that the Spanish were fielding, along with the capture of a Spanish subcommander, Villahermosa did emerge victorious and forced the French to withdraw from the siege, and they came here back to Olat. The Duc de Noailles had to accompany them because they were also in the hex. The prevarication before the battle failed, and so the Duc de Noailles, unluckily, was not able to join with his forces. It would have been a different story had that been the case. So unfortunately, it was just the single besieging force who had to strike the siege, Colonel Pitou, and they had to strike the siege, and they were driven back. The Spanish rolling really well in the 3rd round of combat. A lot of leader casualties. We had, like I said, a captured Spanish leader, sub-commander, and we had a killed French commander from the officers' mess in that battle. And now both sides are going to take the opportunity to reset and reorganize. The Spanish achieving what they wanted, which was to break the siege, and that will cost the French a attack campaign point, ops point, this turn. They've got 2 dedicated to this attack on Castle Follet. So now they're going to have to barge through Villahermosa's army in order to accomplish that by the end of next turn. So I think what we might end up doing is combining this column with the Duc de Noailles and making potentially an attack against Villahermosa, who is short of manpower, shorter than he was anyway, and with the Duc de Noailles still having some auxiliaries that he can task to a battle, he might be able to get the better of the Spanish there and hopefully put that under siege and take it before the year is out. So kind of a swinging back and forth. It was nice to get a bigger battle going. You definitely are at a large advantage when you have multiple wings in a combat and not just one, when the size of your army vastly outnumbers the opponent. So there we are. That's where we stand. We're going to play through, hopefully, the end of summer here. Before I check in again, I'll let you know how these 2 armies tangle, if they tangle again. And I'm trying to fit, like I said, 1689, the full year, into this video. The other thing that I need to note here is that it is actually very bad to have a siege relieved before you take the fortress, because the game exclusive rules say that if that happens, you actually lose prestige. So any of the gains we could have gotten by taking that fortress have been undone. So we were Spanish 7, French 8. Taking that without relief would have meant French 9, Spanish 6. Unfortunately, the Spanish gained a prestige back, and the French lost a prestige for having their siege broken. So even if we take the fortress, we're going to be right back from where we started. So it's quite bad to lose control of your siege situation, and perhaps the French were a bit too aggressive, eyes bigger than their stomach in this year. All right, the French came back at the start of the August-September turn with a counterattack against Villahermosa's troops here at Castle Follet. and successfully won the battle. The viceroy did not. He only has, so he's got a cavalry advantage over the French, and that is basically the only advantage. However, he only has one unit of that cavalry left, his guard, his personal guard cavalry, and he didn't want to use them as the lead unit in the combat and lose that advantage. So unfortunately, he was forced to take some C-grade units, some militia as his lead unit, and that put the French at a bit of an advantage. There's no surprise. However, the Spanish got very lucky. The French won the battle after only one round of combat because Villahermosa tried to do a withdrawal from the battle. He didn't want to be pinned down to a superior French infantry force. And it looked like they were going to do some huge losses to the Spanish. I mean, the first round of combat, the French did 2 SP losses, which was about 20% of his total force. And he decided he was going to try for a withdrawal. He needed to roll, because the command difference between the two leaders is 3 or better, he needed to roll normally a 2 or less for his leadership rating, but because the difference is so high, he needed to roll a 1 or less, so a 20% chance for him to withdraw from the battle, and he rolled a 0. So he successfully was able to disengage from the Duc de Noailles, and with that disengagement, he moves to an adjacent hex with no pursuit risk. So now the French are continuing to blockade and reinvest, hopefully, the fortress of Castle Folit, and hopefully get it to surrender to earn back that prestige. The Spanish now are not really in a position to counterattack. The French numbers, they have the advantage now, and so Villahermosa is probably going to have to withdraw for the rest of the season. He's probably going to hover close by in case he can get a jump, but unfortunately his supporting forces, as you can see, have moved out further west. I felt that the Spanish could possibly withstand a French attack, but unfortunately it was not to be, and therefore his supporting cavalry column is out off in this direction to kind of capture, hopefully, some Baratine's markers before the end of the season. So we have reached a little bit of a let's call it a stalemate for the Spanish, where the efficacy of their armies has kind of been hit, and the French are going to try and take the fortress of Castle Folit before the end of the year. They've got 3 impulses to do that, and it's going to be a little bit harder than I originally imagined, as you saw in my correction. Castle Folit is not an earthworks fort. It is a level 4 fort. So the surrender value is going to be a little bit higher, but hopefully we can get a lucky roll without taking too much attrition and capture it before the season is over, because I only have 1 campaign point left here, and if I fail in this turn, then I will lose another prestige. We have made it to the end of 1689, and actually a little bit through the beginning of 1690. So I'm going to pick up and continue playing the series, but I think we're going to end this video here with a recap of what happened in the fall and in winter of the first year of the full campaign game here in Army of Roussillon. So as you see, as we're coming into the spring of 1690, we've got Baratine's markers back on the map, and that is going to be a common refrain every year in the winter. The Catalonian rebels are going to regather and re-pop up all over the place. So you take all of the French Baratines that they collected for the year, you get the effect of that in the fall quarterly turn to potentially influence the die roll on the Catalan revolt track. Unfortunately, the French did not get a good enough roll to move it towards French support, which would have been the maximum that they could have possibly obtained. And then they were forced to put all the Baratine's markers back on the map within or more than 4 hexes away from the border with Roussillon. And they had to be in urban areas. And as you can see, I'm laying the groundwork for a campaign in these coastal lowlands here with the French. But I will talk about what the campaign plans are for 1690 in a new video, different video, when we get to it. So when we last left off, we were going after here this fortress. We had just won a battle and forced Villahermosa off of that hex. We were then forced to attack Villahermosa because if we just started the siege, he could have counterattacked and broken the siege and made us lose another prestige. We actually devastated Villahermosa's forces. He was forced to retreat all the way down this way. He made a long lap down to Barcelona to gather some reinforcements and then came back up this road. Unfortunately, the French were unable to finish the siege before their operations points ran out, and that meant that they lost prestige again for not completing an attacking campaign plan. So the prestige situation is not great for the French. They're down to 5. The Spanish are up to 9. What I'm telling myself here is that I've learned some valuable lessons about how to screen a besieging force with other columns, A. B, it is a long war, and I'm not going to win or lose it here in the first year, so the French have plenty of time to undo those mistakes in the long term. Now, as we came into the end of fall, we had to pull back out of Catalonia. The rules state that until we get a strategic event that you roll for once a year, the French cannot be in Spanish Catalonian territory between the months of the end of October and the end of April. So the game actually clicked by at a really fast rate when we got to this point, not only because the French couldn't really move into Catalonia without losing prestige, which they didn't want to do, but we got some really bad weather. So we see here, we ended up the year in snow and mud in Roussillon and Catalonia, respectively. That slowed down movement operations, and by that point, both of the armies were didn't really have much that they wanted to do left. However, the Spanish, because of that French restriction on leaving Catalonia before the end of the year, basically, the Spanish were able to put together a quick offensive campaign and retake Camprodon and re-garrison the fortress here. This is actually what happened historically, I believe. I believe the French vacated and the Spanish retook it. So that was another prestige shift in the Spanish's favor for being able to accomplish that. There was no garrison. They just walked in and grabbed it. So that is another lesson that I will have to be learning about this game is, A, if I want to make something stick with these restrictions in place about where French units can end the year, I'm going to have to smash the Spanish forces so that they can't possibly do that. I'm going to have to degrade their fighting ability so much or push them so far back to the west and south that they're not going to be able to take that and try and snatch it at the end of the year. So, with something like Rosas over here, which is a little bit closer to home, that may be something we try this year as the French late in the year. Try and maneuver and surprise the Spanish. The French are going to be focusing on coursing and continuing to grab these Baratines, and that's pretty much how the year is going to go, I think. But yeah, this was I think 16 turns. I think maybe the game started here, so 15 total turns of gameplay here in Lace Wars, and I'm very sort of thrilled that I was able to get that all under my belt and really comprehend the game. I'm still doing rules lookups because there's a lot of in-depth small things at very key moments, like in these quarterly turns. And specific quarterly turns have specific things that only happen. So like I missed that the September-October turn, all of the Spanish militia have to be pulled off the map, only to then potentially regather in the coming season. I didn't do that until I didn't realize I made the mistake till about here. It didn't really matter because the French weren't allowed to be in Catalonia at that point anyway. And then I went through a winter quarterly turn, which had a whole bunch of bookkeeping stuff. It was actually pretty laborious. I had to go consult the orders of battle, bring in all of the possible units that could enter in the 1690 turn. And then I had to roll for each unit to see whether or not they actually did enter. And this is where the Spanish actually are in a real trouble. They get a lot of reinforcements available for 1690, and they rolled so badly. It's already a low chance for them to get their units, but they rolled so badly. These are all reinforcements the Spanish could have gotten and didn't. Down here, I just put them in the recovery box to sort of visualize how many. But that is a lot of units, and that is a lot of regular units. You can see some A-class horse units here. You got some Spanish Marines, auxiliaries. We got a whole bunch of line forces under there that the Spanish didn't get. The Spanish mostly got militia. You can see they padded out their forces here. They did get some new auxiliaries. They've sort of developed 4 maneuver elements for the coming campaign, at least to start with. They've still got their cavalry column here, but we did put in some cavalry and infantry line and militia that they got into this column here. This column, B column, is marching up from all the way down over here from further south in Spain. So they're going to have to come up this way. We have a C column here of mostly militia units and migueletes. The Spanish did crucially get some artillery. You can see, including some siege artillery. So we've got some siege artillery plus some field artilleries here. We have some field artilleries here. So that is going to make the battles, that's going to shift the battles a little bit. The French aren't just going to have a total artillery advantage. Now, the French, for their part, got way more reinforcements, primarily because they got a ton of militia. And those militia are really garbage. There's a big stack up here, if you can see, of E-ranked militia. The only thing I'm going to do with those is garrison these forts along the border and use them to replace line losses. Because we have so much militia, I am going to be using that manpower to be hyper-aggressive against the Spanish in the coming year. Any losses I take can be replaced by filling in with militia units. So we have a deep pool of manpower to pull from. We also got some mountain artillery and some mountain siege artillery. That is going to make the march to places like Camprodon and possibly down this direction a lot easier with the terrain, which is nice. I am going to have to wait for the weather to be better. There is an optional rule in this system to that models sort of the cavalry preparations for a campaign, and basically it says that in the spring months that cavalry's effectiveness is one letter worse than they would be normally printed on their counter. I am playing with that because it does simulate pretty well how most campaigns didn't get started till late May. Or even June in this period, simply because they had to get the horses out to pasture in the spring and make sure they built up their strength. So we will be playing with that. A lot of cavalry came in on the French side. The Spanish also got some cavalry. And so, yeah, it's going to be a much more dynamic second year of the game. 4 maneuver elements for the Spanish. We've also got 3 maneuver elements there for the French. I actually do need to draw a leader for that column. So we're going to have a lot more going on in the map and a lot more spaces, probably a lot more combat, a lot more skirmishing. The war is kind of expanding at this point, so it should be quite an interesting play as we continue. The strategic events are quite interesting. You do those in these quarterly turns, stuff that reflects the rest of the 9 Years' War happening outside of Spain, the Spanish War in Africa, the Huguenot rebellions in France. None of those things triggered this turn, but over the course of the game as you play, they can trigger more and more. We did actually, crucially, get a pro-French faction in the Spanish court. That is interesting because it moved the peace track up by another box. And while that is the case, there is a chance that Villahermosa will get replaced next year. So every year you roll to see if the Spanish viceroy changes. And this year he was able to dodge it, but you could get a succession of viceroy promotions and different leaders coming in. So it's good for the French that Villahermosa is still the commander of Spanish forces. He's not a very good leader, and so the French are going to try and push that advantage as much as possible. What else do I have to say? I think, you have a good sense now, kind of the flow of the game, the mechanics of the game, some of the strategic considerations. I would say that this is a very dense game. This is probably one of the more dense and complicated operational games that I've ever played. I love it because I love the period, and I love that the designer did not abstract away anything. He looked at all aspects of this era and built in systems for those campaigns. Now, what that does mean is there's some discrepancies between what's in the charts and tables and what's in the game-specific rules, or actually even the core rules, or even the order of battle booklets. I have been finding small discrepancies here and there that I've been sending to the designer, and hopefully on a errata file, which he said he was going to post, will get posted soon. It's small stuff where like the tables are right and the rules are wrong. He's clarified some of that stuff. Yeah, otherwise, I'm really, really enjoying it. It is a fascinating game. You don't really see this level of detail outside of stuff in other you don't see this level of detail in war games a lot. And I'm trying to think on the top of my head, like what the most comparable thing. I think Next War I've already talked about, but also I'm playing Campaign for North Africa on and off right now with a group, and this reminds me a lot of kind of the scale and scope of Campaign for North Africa. Now there's like 200 times less paperwork for this game. The game does a good job of giving you the tools to keep track of everything, and it is a much less technologically advanced time, but certainly the chart lookups, there's about the same number of charts as Campaign for North Africa. You're just dealing with a lot less minutia when it comes to like firearms and tanks and stuff like that. So this is sort of the close of the 1689 turn. I hope you like what you've seen. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback on this series, so I'm going to continue it. Not in this much detail, certainly, but I will come back and check in every now and again, do a video. I will do one about the campaign plans for 1690, and then probably another video to show you how that's going. If you want to keep seeing more Lace Wars and how Army of Roussillon is unfolding, this is probably going to be on my table for quite a long time. I have just kind of set this up and have left it, which is nice. And I will play it on and off. I have other videos I want to do, other games I want to play, but for the time being, I am still thoroughly engaged by this, even just as a solo learning experience. And I want to see what continues to unfold as the war gets longer. Some of these events really drastically change what happens. And as soon as the French can stop having to pull back to France at the end of the year and they can stay in Spain, then it becomes, game on. That's going to be a real interesting situation. So, thanks for sticking with me this far. This is been a really nice experiment and a really big surprise, and I can't wait to assess where this series falls for me at the end of the year when I talk about my favorite games, because there's stuff I really, really like about it, but also there's stuff that is like so unapproachable that only I right now am probably the one enjoying doing this stuff and working really hard to learn it. This is not easy on board for sure. And I want to play some of the other games in this series against human opponents, because I think that will bring a much different feel to the fog of war element of this, which is, you know, kind of missing right now as I'm trying to keep all the information straight in my head. So I'm going to stop rambling. Lace Wars, 1689 complete. I'll see you in the next one.